Welcome everyone to our Battery Performance Expectations course. This is the second in a series of 4 classes, and we're very glad to have you here today. Some of you may have already been in the first class. Some of this information is going to definitely be like, hey, I just watched this last week, and we understand that, you know, this is just a little bit different, tailored for battery resource operators. But the information still stands because the expectations are the same for those that operate battery resources as well. So it's a lot of reinforcement, but we'll keep moving along with that. So, all right. So why are we here? To prepare our resource operators and owners to effectively manage their battery resources to maintain market efficiency and grid reliability. Again, those that might have been in last week's. Very similar, we just, taking it to this, kind of honing in on the battery resources, but it still requires a partnership for all resource owners and operators, scheduling coordinators, the ISO, and the balancing authority areas within the WEC interconnection to really work together in order to maintain system reliability. Because that's what we're all about, is to keep those lights on and do it safely and reliably. So what are you going to be learning today? We'll talk a little bit, again, reinforcing that. How do my battery resources fit in the bulk electric system? Sometimes we hear, that it's like, well, I'm not a generator, I'm a battery. But how do those resources fit in? How are they integrated? What are my battery resource capabilities? What kind of a setup do I have? What are my requirements for physical management of my battery resource? What are my communication responses? What are the reliability consequences of not following my instructions? And where can I learn more? So this is kind of perfect because I hear a little bit of background noise. So if you could, please keep yourself muted while the training is going on, just to minimize any kind of background noise. But definitely we want to, allow you to unmute yourself to ask verbal questions, but you can also write your questions in the chat. You may already have seen that Radha, who's our producer for today, she put in the note, what are you hoping to gain from today's class? What is your name? What company are you representing? We definitely want to hear from you. So chat is a great way to enter your questions. Or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you at periodic stops throughout. So we'll try to keep the training moving and definitely have opportunities where we'll open it up for questions. I did forget to mention I just mentioned Radha is our producer. I'm Heidi Carter, one of our lead customer education trainers here in the customer readiness group, and it's a part of a larger group, the stakeholder engagement team. So what's next? I want to set the stage before we even move forward. This training is being recorded, so we get that question quite a lot. We've already recorded last week's class. It is available on the Learning Center. Radha is going to put it in the chat, the link to the ISO Learning Center where you can find that. It's the copy of the slides from last week as well as the recording. Within 3 business days, we will post today's class as well with a presentation on the Learning Center. Any questions that are gathered during this course, whether we answer them in class or if we don't get a chance to answer them and we have to follow up on them later, those will be collected. We're going to be turning those into a comprehensive Q&A guide that will be posted, and so that will be created. And after all 4 of the courses in the series are created, and we plan to post that in mid-June on the ISO Learning Center. There is a storage resources computer-based training course. That is going to be updated with a lot of the information that we have in here, and I'll show you as we're going through some of the pieces, especially when it comes more to the SC role and bidding for storage resources. We're not really going to go into that so much because we're really looking at the resource owner operators, those that are actually physically, running the resources and making sure that we're connecting with those customers. So we do have some information that has come out by some of the projects that have been really changing because storage is moving so fast. It's, we're learning something new, every day. So there are efforts that are going to be made to update our storage resources computer-based training course, and that will be republished in mid-June. This, again, is the second training in a series of 4, and it's focused, like I just said, on our resource owner operators because we are going to be taking all of this material. This is foundational. This is high-level level setting for a broader audience, and that, and based on that, we're going to be creating a resource owner operator training track. Right now, we have it for market operations. We have settlements learning track, scheduling coordinator learning track. We're revamping all of our learning tracks, but we're really starting by creating a resource owner operator training track. So all of this information is going to go in there. And as we continue to evolve, gather information on the actual physical tasks that are being done, this training will evolve into a more task-based training track. So please stay tuned, please stay engaged because this will continue to evolve over the next couple of years. All right, so where do you fit into the overall picture? For those of you that were on the call last week, you might remember this when we talk about, it's all about the balance and making sure we're maintaining that 60 hertz, that we're balancing the generation with the demand, the supply with the demand. And we've got our generation dispatchers, one of them that you heard from last week. They're looking over this, making sure that they're maintaining balance, that they're mitigating any kind of these issues so that we can maintain that frequency as close to 60 hertz as possible. And we'll talk a little bit more about frequency a little bit later in the presentation. But where we have, and we have reserves as well. So especially within the ISO footprint, we're managing that balance of energy, but we also have to make sure that we have sufficient reserves, capacity reserves, and we get those through ancillary services, resource efficiency from the, from the WEIM standpoint, and we've got, resource adequacy programs, all making sure that we're getting to where energy is actually being produced, and we're making sure that we have sufficiency. So when that breaks, when this 60 hertz doesn't, when we're not maintaining that, that's when we can have problems, and you're going to be able to fill those problems in a larger area. So especially for the battery operators, there are so many that are coming out, so many different ones, and really helping to understand how you're all connected is really critical. Because if we don't maintain that 60 hertz, now we're going to have a bigger issue that's going to be affecting the bulk electric system. So here you see a transmission map of Western Electricity Coordinating Council from their site. And you can see, excuse me, you can see the Western interconnection and just how interconnected we really are. And as we go through and we'll talk about it, really want to make sure that you put that in your mind that when you're running a resource and you're down in Southern California, that impacts those that are all the way up in British Columbia and Alberta. So everything is connected. And so when you start thinking about bigger picture, any decisions you make are affecting this larger picture. You probably remember this from last week as well, but the ISO, we are in kind of have 3 different footprints, if you will, and it is, again, all interconnected. So we've got the ISO BAA, our balancing authority area. That's about 80% of California. And last week, if you want to go back to that training, we shared some of the numbers that make that up. We've got our participating transmission owners down to the distribution underneath that. We've got RC West, that's another function of the ISO. They're looking at that bigger picture. Our gen dispatchers will report up to the RC if they see anything that's a larger grid disturbance, or the RC will contact our gen dispatchers if they see something, so that making sure that there's situational awareness across the grid throughout, the Western interconnection for all of our customers to try and mitigate any kind of potential system impacts. And then we've got the WEIM as well. So that's our real-time market that we've extended to other balancing authority areas within the Western interconnection. And so, again, every decision that's being made on each resource has a potential impact for all of these different locations. My computer's trying to freeze up a little bit, so it might jump ahead here in a second. But so participation with the ISO just depends on the services that each that each entity has. So we've got generation, so that's where your batteries are located. The load serving entities, the different balancing authority areas. And in order to do any kind of work with the participate in the ISO markets, you either have to be a scheduling coordinator or procure the services of a scheduling coordinator. And that's where the communication is mainly between the scheduling coordinators and the ISO. So making sure that you have those communication paths on your side and that awareness, and you're working in collaboration with your scheduling coordinator. If you are a battery resource, if you're a generator resource, load serving entity, balancing authority, that's who you want to be working with in order to participate with the ISO. And then the ISO, we've got our transmission that works with the local utilities, and then that ties with the, they tie together with the consumers. But there are a lot of practices, processes that are constantly going on, and a lot of changes that are constantly being made in order to meet the needs of our consumers. So that's kind of just that recap of the bigger picture. And so, from a bulk electric system standpoint, the grid, but now we've got a whole new animal, if you will, that is just been growing and growing and is having a whole new set of impacts on the bulk electric system, and that's your battery energy storage system. So your battery resources. So I just see it's on note that is anybody else having problems hearing or any kind of audio issues? So, okay. So, okay, great, Steve. All right, so a BESS that, typically has several critical components. They all work together to store and manage the energy that we need. They're a crucial component. The batteries are a crucial component within the BESS because they store that energy that's needed to be dispatched, especially for variable energy resources that can't be producing energy when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. So these are often stacked together and made available to add greater flexibility to the fleet of energy that we have available. So energy storage systems, they enhance the power system flexibility. They enable higher levels of renewable energy integration. They're consistent with our clean energy and climate goals. these systems all complement our intermittent variable energy resources. They collect all that excess clean energy, the renewable energy, and then they release it when necessary to support the sustainability of the grid. So when we, when we have peak demand, peak ramping needs that have maybe been a little bit more inconsistent or stretched in tight conditions, battery resources can help meet those needs. And they can also be effective at replacing a lot of different, resources, traditional resources that are retiring, such as gas resources. So solar energy that can only, generate energy during daylight hours. So excess solar can be, used to charge their batteries during the day. And then when the supply is a little greater than the demand, we can, that's when those can be charging. But then later in the day, when that net demand increases and there, like I said, the solar resources can't generate, batteries can then discharge to meet the system needs. When we talk about kind of some of the peak needs that we have, here you see some statistics from last year for solar peak, wind peak, and peak demand. But then you can also see just the growth of batteries that we have just from from earlier into 2023 just till February. We just actually had our summer readiness report come out, and it shows the number of new batteries that we plan to have come on by the end of the year compared to what we already have. So this is continuing to grow. So batteries are the ISO has set up different models, and they continue to evolve in order to accommodate all the unique operating and technical characteristics that batteries do bring to the system. So we have a few different setups. There's the standalone storage resource. They operate as separate independent resources. They're connected directly to the grid, and they participate like any other resource at a node. They've got their own resource ID that the scheduling coordinators can use to submit bids for, and then the market can optimize for those resources and send out dispatch instructions to ADS for the SCs and the resource owner operators to be able to see. So those are standalone, they're directly connected to the grid and have their own individual resource ID. Co-located resources, they consist of different energy technologies. Perhaps they have wind, solar, and battery. And those are located at the same generating facility. They share the same interconnection point to the grid. But even though they're all located in that same area, they operate independently and are managed as separate market entities, with each of them having their own resource ID. So they share a point of interconnection, or POI, but each one of the different technologies, would have a different resource ID. So if there were 2 wind generators, a battery, and 3 solar resources, each one of those would have their own resource ID that the scheduling coordinator would be able to submit bids on behalf of, and that would be dispatched if they were awarded individually as well. So it's maybe more bidding up front, but when it comes to actually managing the resources, it's more on an individual level. But when you look at the hybrid model, that's when it can get a little more complicated, because these are similar to co-located resources. They're similar because, again, they have different technologies, and within the same facility, they share that same interconnection point to the grid, but they're different because they're managed by a single market entity. So they have one resource ID. So, again, it could be, a battery and a solar, battery, solar, wind, et cetera. but it would end up being just one resource ID. So that aggregated value would be what would be awarded for megawatts based on bids in the day ahead. And then it would be up to the SC or resource operator as to which of the resources within that hybrid model are actually going to be used to meet those awards. It can get a little bit more complicated because you do have them more integrated, and it can be a little bit harder for the market to see too, because batteries are so unique to traditional or even variable energy resources. So that can present some challenges. There's another option for resources to bid in just capacity only into the day-ahead market, into the regulation markets only, and they would be awarded for regulation up or down. So, you know, if you get an award, it could be for either direction. But if the resource is choosing to participate in that REM, those are for capacity only and be awarded for those, but cannot submit bids for any other services. So co-located resources and aggregate capability constraint. This is something that has been created. So it's intended for it's the combined production capabilities of a co-located resource. We want to prevent them from being able to exceed the capacity limit of their shared POI. So to prevent this, we have created a production constraint for a model, and it's called the aggregate capability constraint. It's part of the market optimization for co-located resources, preventing the market from dispatching the co-located resources above their studied interconnection service capability. There have been enhancements that have been going along with the, there have been a couple of different efforts that are going on. There were, and the one is the energy storage initiatives. And so I see that Arata put the link to the energy storage enhancements track 2 training. There was a training about this, and there is also a Q&A guide. There's a video. So there, I would encourage you to look, because we're not going to go into depth in this, but this is one of the points that we're going to be actually enhancing in our CBT and our storage resources CBT in mid-June. So if you are curious about delving into this a little bit more at this point, I encourage you to check out the link that Rada just put in there, because that will answer a lot of the questions, go into a little bit of a deeper dive about what that model is, and also keep following that process, because that initiative is continuing to grow, continuing to evolve. And so that's something to keep an eye on. Kind of similar to that is the off-grid charge indicator. So this is a new tab that's in Cyber and our bidding tool, and this is for the day ahead. In this picture, it can also be in the real time. So this off-grid charge indicator, it's to enforce the charging constraint within Cyber. It allows a co-located storage resource to elect not to charge beyond the output of its associated co-located VER. Once this is implemented, the yes-no indicator, it can be managed in Cyber, and it can be managed on an hourly basis. So in creating this functionality, the ISO we did not make broader changes to the existing policy or to the ISO tariff requirements on the feasibility of bids or the must offer obligation for resource adequacy capacity. So these charging constraints, they're a biddable parameter. They're intended to help ensure more feasible charging dispatches, but they are completely at the SC's risk and discretion. So the requirement in the tariff in section 37.3.1.1 to submit feasible bids for energy and ancillary services, and that's based on all information that is known to the market participant or should have been known to the market participant at the time of the bid submission, that remains in effect. So again, nothing has changed to the tariff. This feasibility requirement also applies to the charging range for a storage resource. So for example, if the scheduling coordinator submits a bid on the charging range of a resource, the bid should only cover the range of the scheduling coordinator expects the resource to feasibly be able to charge up to. So failure to comply with this requirement to submit a feasible bid, that can expose the scheduling coordinator to FERC penalties. So the must offer obligations part of this for RA capacity, that's spelled out in tariff section 40, and the reliability requirements business practice manual, which still remains in effect. So in general, failure to meet those must offer obligations with bids submitted to the market are subject to RA resources. They could subject them to the RAIM non-availability charges. And so, you know, in addition, concerns about compliance with tariff section 37.3.1.1, a co-located resource use of the OGCI, that makes the bids from its RA capacity inaccessible to the market. That could raise questions about whether this tool was used to avoid, you know, RAIM non-availability charges. So that would be something that would be looked at. Again, nothing significant has changed from this. Their, you know, persistent, systematic inability to meet must offer obligations with feasible bids, again, may raise some questions. Outage reporting obligations that are spelled out in tariff section 9 and section 3.4 of the outage management BPM, those are still in effect. So that state of charge, which we'll talk about in a moment, still a binding parameter in the optimization. And so we are going to be creating this portion. We're going to be building this out. So we're not going to really talk about this at this point because nothing has significantly changed to any of the requirements. This information will be added to the enhanced CBT for storage resources that will be coming out mid-June, and then we will open that up for any kinds of questions. There is a link, or there is a city knowledge article that is available. It's available in city, and it is called the off-grid charge indicator. So this knowledge article, it answers the question of how can co-located resource opt out of charging from grid utilizing the off-grid charge indicator. So there's a solution that's put in there. There is a way that you would initiate the process, and there's a link to the spreadsheet and the different timing, et cetera. All this information that we just talked about the different tariff sections, those are referred to in this knowledge article. So if this is something that you're interested in now, I would highly recommend that you put your, you know, check that out, that knowledge article out. If you have direct questions about it right now, please put that into a city ticket because we're going to be, you know, gathering that. And that will help us as we create this training, this enhanced training. So stay tuned. More information to come on that. All right. Oops. Sorry, I went a little too far. So the state of charge, it represents a battery's level of charge relative to its capacity. So it ranges from complete discharge to fully charged. This SOC, like I said, it represents the battery's level of charge relative to its capacity. uh, the SOC influences a battery's ability to provide energy or ancillary services to the grid over a period of time. So storage resources, they have a minimum and a maximum SOC that the market software does observe, and that is expressed in megawatt hours. Like generators, storage resources do have a PMIN and a PMAX, so a physical minimum and a physical maximum, and that value indicates the minimum and maximum megawatts that the ISO software can dispatch a resource to. And so the PMIN and PMAX are not the SOC. The state of charge is still it's still specific to the battery, but from the market standpoint, what it's looking at as far as where it can dispatch you would be the PMIN and PMAX. So managing a resource state of charge, there's efforts that you have to take care of in the day ahead as well as real time. So in the day ahead, it requires a resource to submit its SOC for hour ending 1 in cyber. And just a moment ago, we talked about the REM, those resources that supply regulation only, the ones that cannot submit the bids for energy. The REM SOC is 50%, so they have equal upward or downward mobility. But the non-REM resources, the market tracks that resource's SOC, uses that to determine when to charge or discharge in order to optimize it across the full 24-hour period. Because again, the day-ahead market, it's looking at the bids that are submitted and making that optimization over that longer time frame. Then when we get down to the real time, now we're looking at the hourly values down to the 5-minute, 15-minute time frames. So we're ensuring, again, we're looking at the SOC using the telemetry. This is why it's very important that, when you test telemetry, when you're making sure that information that's coming back and forth to the ISO, that is accurate information, and because that's going to be the measurement of the flow on the lines. And that's going to allow us to ensure that the sufficient SOC is reserved to support market awards. So for managing a resources state of charge, for reserves, we've got spin and non-spin awards. They ensure that 30 minutes of SOC is reserved in the FMM and the RTD. So in the 15-minute and the 5-minute. And then for regulation up and down awards, that's ensuring that 30 minutes of SOC is reserved for the FMM and the RTD, and 20 minutes of state of charge for the RTCD, so for the real-time contingency dispatch. For self-schedules, again, those are the schedules that are put in with without bids, so megawatts only. Those are respected by reserving SOC for the self-schedules, and those that are outside of the real-time dispatch horizon. But the real-time dispatch ensures that the SOC is reserved to meet the self-schedule for that hour. So a little bit on the regulation. in scheduling and awarding storage resources, the market's ensuring that resources are going to have the SOC that can maintain, again, both the up and regulation up and down. If the FMM is seeing telemetered SOC that's less than the defined criteria, the FMM will automatically buy back AS until the FMM receives the SOC telemetry value that's within the criteria. I'm seeing some notes. Sorry, I'm kind of seeing some questions about the off-grid charge indicator. Yeah, we're going to keep it kind of high level because this, like we said, we are creating a training on this, and so we didn't want to go too deep. So we'll do our best to answer the questions that that anyone has. We'll see if we have any of our subject matter experts that can answer your questions. Again, about the off-grid charge indicator, because it looks like that's what the questions are. Again, there are changes that they're being made. It's part of policy. This is not a policy meeting, and so we will capture questions and follow up as necessary for any questions that we can answer at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat now. I see that Chris Devon. Well, first of all, before that, thanks, Kyle, for sharing the link. Clarissa had a question from the CPA. During unscheduled ISO testing, does the ISO respect off-grid charge indicator and ensure that the resource won't be instructed to charge off-grid? Do I have one of my subject matter experts that can answer that question?
Hi, Heidi. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It's during unscheduled ISO testing, does the ISO respect the off-grid charge indicator and ensure that the resource won't be instructed to charge off-grid?
To the best of our ability. To the best of our ability, yes.
Okay, perfect.
And,
all right.
And a little more, yeah. And the way I think I read the question is, yes means I do not want to charge off the grid. And that's a cyber setting. Well, it's a default master setting. And then you can also change it when you bid in day ahead and real time. So if you have defaulted it to yes, then I suppose you can change your mind in day ahead and real time and say no. But yeah, the answer to that question is yes means no charging off grid.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. And then Chris, you feel free to raise your hand if you like. I also see that, so from Shub, why elections indicates the scheduling coordinator's intention to not charge from the grid. So thanks for putting that in there. Kathleen, I also see that your hand is up, so I'll go to you. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thanks, Heidi. Quick question for you, Heidi. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. So I have questions and a request around outages, but before I ask that, can I also just get a better sense of your agenda? Do you have do you have content for that you'd prefer me to wait? I can defer to Chris if you do. Come ahead.
Is it for outages or for the OGCI that you're asking?
Your knowledge. So your knowledge article has something about outages, and you also mentioned something about outage reporting requirements that are in section 9. I'm sure you're aware that we're presenting this afternoon on a request for a stakeholder initiative to address the current tariff gap But I just want to make sure everyone on this call is aware there is a big gap in that section today. There are no, I mean zero, none, does not exist, which is why we need to cure it. And you're right, we have to work on that. I'm so happy to hear that CAISO is finally maybe listening to our ask. We asked the CAISO to add outage reporting requirements for storage, co-located, and hybrid beginning back in 2021, which I hope you know that, right? And so we've been lobbying super hard for that. We're going to present again on it this afternoon, make what I hope is going to be a super compelling case that the CAISO actually does a stakeholder initiative and add them. But there is no requirement for outage reporting for non-generator resources, co-located resources, or hybrid resources today. So if the CAISO team cares about that and stakeholders care about clarity, I'd like to ask you to come support these appeals that we're making this afternoon to the policy team to actually develop rules so that we can have consistency and clarity. But I just want to be clear, they do not exist. So you have a knowledge article that refers to it, and that section has no rules associated with these resource types you just defined.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and this is Heather from the CAISO.
What time is your meeting?
Yeah, and with who?
What time is your meeting, Kathleen?
Yeah, we have the policy roadmap from 1 to 5, and I have an agenda item where I'll be walking through these gaps in the tariff and making this appeal.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, this is just kind of training on what we have now, but like you said, that's in the policy realm. But I do encourage everyone, especially if this is something that you do and you think, oh, I'm not a policy person, you know, it's a great opportunity to listen in on those, because everything that's done in policy does end up impacting, you know, the end users. So thanks for bringing that up. And you know, like I said earlier,
thanks, Heidi.
This is kind of training, this is what we have, but there's always opportunity, and that's kind of why I did want to go into this to letting everybody know that we have it, but it's also something that's being, you know, that's evolved. So yeah, like you said, if other people have those concerns, those questions, definitely listen in, and you know, we definitely are interested in stakeholder, you know, and sometimes the more folks that will talk about something that, you know, and they see a general need, then there's better opportunity. So great, thank you very much, Kathleen.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And the only reason I brought it up right now is because you implied they exist, and I'm about to make this massive pitch to add them to the tariff. And so I really just wanted to make sure that I still get the support for the need to add these requirements to the tariff, because I agree with you, it's important that there be those. And the fact that we don't have them today leads to inconsistent outage practices. It can undermine reliability. Like, there's massive reasons we need to do this, but you did mention that they exist, and I want to make sure that there's consistency as we make this appeal to CAISO to add these rules. That's the only reason I brought it up. So thank you, Heidi.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. All right. I don't know if anybody else is. Chris, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead. Thanks for being patient.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. This is Chris Devon with TerraGen. We represent a significant amount of assets in the CAISO market that are either hybrid or co-located, BESS and solar, and wind units. So this issue is of utmost importance to us. And I also am going to be presenting later today at that same meeting that Kathleen will be presenting on. Our topics that we submitted into the catalog are related to hybrid and co-located resource clarifications, particularly related to ancillary service provision and operations of these resources, and potentially also other issues related to the use of outage cards and operational indications of availability. The dynamic limit tool. There's a host of issues here that we have been talking about individually with CAISO for the past year, and then even prior to my joining TerraGen, this was an issue that CAISO had noted was important in the initial policy development process back in 2020 and 2021, but there really has been no follow-up on that, and we've seen a lot of these things be done through these kind of trainings like this, and kind of piecemeal efforts to try to indicate how the CAISO would treat some of these conditions or operations outcomes. I see a bunch of questions in the chat from the Clean Power Alliance and others that are related to issues that I think are certainly in need of significant amount of discussion and clarification. I don't think this is actually the right realm for that. To your point, I think, Heidi, about this being a training on existing provisions. But the thing I want to flag and highlight here for this whole entire meeting is that these issues that really have been done in a way where CAISO is providing guidance that is interpreting existing tariff and existing provisions that really haven't contemplated some of these issues very well. And I think we need to have a broader, open stakeholder discussion in a policy sense. So again, I want to also plug, like what Kathleen said, the CAISO really should prioritize this as a significant issue that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. There are a ton of these resources that are coming online already on the system, and we'll have grid charging restrictions. And so these things were really not contemplated in that hybrid resources initiative in to the fullest extent that they need to be. The CAISO kind of did a little bit to start discussing it, but then there really hasn't been any of the follow-up discussions to continue to develop these provisions in a way that actually helps provide the clarity that's needed, so that everybody's doing things on the same page. So I just wanted to chime in and mention that here because I think it's important to stress that, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for your time and hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I see that there are a couple of other questions. I think you, Kathleen, made a great point. There are a lot of questions. So we will be capturing these questions that are in here, such as what, why did the ISO believe it necessary to make certain changes? Those things are, again, outside of the scope of the training here. However, again, it's a good opportunity. Sometimes training brings out the issues. Again, for the folks that are actually doing the work, it's a good opportunity to go, how can I have my voice heard in policy decisions, because they are going to impact you down the road. So I encourage anyone who has more interest in joining this afternoon in that meeting. Should be on the ISO calendar if you wanted to join. But for now, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break and then come back. And Janice, you're right. It was my dog that is not happy. he got out from where he was supposed to be and got into my door. So I'm going to take this opportunity to go quiet my puppy and take a little break. And we'll come back in 10 minutes and keep moving forward. But thanks all for the discussion.
Okay, Heidi.
Thank you. Remember to put it on pause, but not to take it off, so thank you. All right, so again, we're moving on here to management of resources. We did talk about this last week, so just keeping on going with this. So what are those priorities that you want to make sure that you're following when you are when you're managing your resource? You definitely want to be following any operating instructions when they're issued by the ISO. Notify the ISO immediately if your resource is incapable of following your dispatch operating target. Ramp linearly to follow dispatch operating targets mid-interval to mid-interval, and follow your dispatch operating targets accurately. So again, we talked about this last week, and so did go into some of that. So kind of go over this a little bit quickly, but we just wanted to make sure that we're reinforcing the points of all of these things. We've already heard from a couple of our subject matter experts in this area. So Brian and Michael, and so feel free to chime in from the operational experience as we go through the section, because that always helps with the resource owner operators to have that idea of what it is that our real-time operators are actually looking for in order to maintain system reliability. So keep going here. So again, resource instructions, they're sent via the ADS system. So for each 15-minute interval, the market's either starting up, shutting down, transitioning resources. For every 5 minutes, you're getting the real-time dispatch instructions. So this is where you're going to be seeing those different instructions for your different resources. You know, last week we went through it. There is a user guide for ADS that talks about the different the different fields, what they are, and one of the important parts, you know, is definitely the trajectory plot for your specified resource. That's going to give you your dispatch operating targets, your dispatch operating points that you're going to be wanting to follow through. But it will show you, again, remind you of a couple of extra fields that you're going to want to have available on this, you know, on these grids, so that you can see any kind of changes, any kind of operating instructions, any kind of changes that may happen to your dispatches, to your different instructions. You're going to be able to see those quickly so that you can resolve those as quickly as possible. So again, dispatch operating, just making sure that we're still on the same page for terminology. The dispatch operating target, those are received via ADS. Those are your instructions of where your resource needs to be going, what it needs to be achieving in that next 5-minute interval. For eligible intermittent resources, they're supposed to produce as capable unless they receive an operating instruction. So on your daily basis, this is what you're going to see. You're going to be getting these dispatch operating instructions. Here's an example, and you're going to want to make sure that you're following these. Following these instructions on a regular basis. If you can't, if there's something that you physically can't do, then you're going to want to make sure that you're informing the market, so you don't keep getting instructions that your resource cannot achieve. The operating instructions, again, are those emergency instructions. So again, they might come through EMS or verbal communication. You may get both depending on the situation. They may be received as ADS as the result of operator intervention, and you're required to follow within the given timelines and ramp requirements unless physically impossible. So here again is the example of an operating instruction. You would get a notice as to, you know, if an operating instruction is sent out, you're going to see this, and in the note field, you're going to see it's going to indicate do not exceed the DOT or your dispatch operating target, and there's going to be a reason. The resource is obligated to comply with an operating instruction within 10 minutes, and this acknowledgement should be visible when the first user from the SCA organization acknowledges the pop-up. And it's only going to pop up once per user per time horizon of the instructions. So, you know, you definitely want to make sure that you're you know, looking out for those, that you're acknowledging them, because there is a time crunch in order to make sure that you're following those. In ADS, again, here are the columns that you want to make sure to keep open. And so when the resources are not following their dots, again, the operating instructions start and end time, the reason, the flag, the follow the dot flag, and the real-time supplemental energy. So we kind of talked about this in the last class, but these are the ones that you want to make sure that are, you know, you save it. So these are there so that you can get informed right away and be able to take appropriate action. from an ancillary services, just a reminder on this, because it's kind of going along with, you know, following your instructions. Ancillary services, they're there to ensure reliability as electricity is moved from generating sources to the customer. So again, there's the regulation that every 4 seconds that is that corrects for short-term changes in electricity that might affect the stability of the power system. So these are the resources that are under the ISO control through AGC, the automatic generation control. Again, that allows us to move those every 4 seconds. So one of the things you want to think about when you're running your battery, you know, let's say you're the one that's testing it and you make sure that it all works. When you hand that over to the resource operator, you need to make sure that that resource operator knows how to put the resource on to AGC or off of manually, so that if there are any kind of needs to change or you need to take it back on manual control or not, that needs to be something that is you know, tested during the onboarding process and then shared and made into a procedure for the resource operator, so that that can be something that's seamless based on need. The operating reserves, those are the capacity products designed to ensure reliability in the event of a grid disturbance. So a lot of batteries are fulfilling the needs of, for ancillary services because that energy is there, it's quick and available. So, well, it's a good thing. It also needs to be considered when we start talking about ramping and linear ramps, that the timing of being able to supply for these ancillary services is considered as well. So market instructions for energy and ancillary services, they can come both from ADS and AGC. So if we looked at this as an example, let's say we've got awards for an energy, for a battery, and the award is to produce energy and AS, and they're going to operate together. So if the award was for 30 megawatts for energy, and then 10 megawatts for regulation up, 5 megawatts for regulation down, and then there's a DOT for 30 megawatts. The regulation that's going to be provided is going to be within a range of 25 to 40, because again, regulation goes up and down. So based on those numbers, that's what gives you that range where it needs to be able to go up an extra 10 megawatts and down to accommodate for both of those. We said the ADS, that's providing the dispatch operating targets for the energy that they're receiving for every 5 minutes. And then AGC, that's sending the signals to manage regulation instructions, and those are sent every 4 minutes. Kathleen, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Heidi. This is really great. And this is, so Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. So I attended the last training as well, and there is something that you talked about, you and Drew, I believe it was, who was with us, on this topic about instances in which there are issues with, let's say, ADS, and in that instance, like conventional generators normally always have the ability to switch, to manually switch to other mechanisms to ensure that they're continuing to operate even when certain parts of the systems are not receiving instructions. Does that mean, okay. And I heard Drew say that, and I took a note and I've been thinking about it since we met last time on these training series, that battery energy storage systems, like generally he said, don't have that ability to manually control. And that really has been on my mind since that meeting. And I wanted to ask if you could help me understand why. Because like from experience, we have systems that go down. I think most power plants, at least conventional ones, have that functionality. I I guess I've been struggling with why isn't there, you know, through the new resource implementation process, like a check for that? And could you just help me understand? Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, what he was really talking about is that it's not that the resource is incapable. I think sometimes it's that there hasn't been a training handoff necessarily. So sometimes the folks that are testing the resource that make sure that it can go on and off the AGC, they kind of taken it through the onboarding process, and then the handoff goes to those that are just going to be operating it. And there's not always a lot of transfer of knowledge that goes along with it. So I think it's more of a, not being completely sure how to do it, not that it's incapable. And so that's why we're trying to encourage this kind of to really be thinking about this, taking it back into your own shops and saying, all right, scheduling coordinators, if you're responsible for onboarding a resource and you're going through checking all the boxes, that then when you actually now turn the actual keys, if you will, over to the resource operators, what kind of training, have you made sure that they were able to be in the test? Are they there to be able to manually run the resource? Is anybody, physically, in the location or remotely? Do they know all the steps that it takes? So I think that's more where he was going with it, but I don't know, Brian or Michael, if you wanted to add anything in there.
You're correct, Heidi. That is definitely what we're seeing on in the reliability side. We're seeing it's mostly a generator operator training issue, that they're unable or they have a lack of knowledge of how to assume that manual control.
Thank you both for clarifying, because I walked away from the last meeting hearing you say that it wasn't being installed at the facilities, and it's just something that stuck with me, and I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No, thanks for clarifying, because and a lot of issues can be resolved by just sharing that knowledge and saying, okay, it's almost like we talked about policy before. You've got people that are in policy that they're like, oh, they're very involved, and then the people that have their hands on it aren't necessarily, and so that handoff across all parts is really critical. So thanks for asking that. Mahed, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Heidi. Just have a quick question about the slide that you have. So just to make sure we're on the same page, so if we're getting a DOT and we're getting a AS signal to AGC at the same time, is the unit expected to respond to both, or AGC take priority?
So the DOT would be your range, and then the AS signal would be your final destination. So essentially the AS signal would be the trumping of the DOT.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Great question, and thank you, Brian. All right. So we talked about this last time, but again, just wanted to make sure we're clarifying, so in order to be able to provide for ancillary services, if you've been certified as a resource, you need to be able to ramp on and off of the AGC to the dispatch operating point in linear fashion. You need to be able to stay on AGC for the entire duration of that award, and also have the manual controls to place on AGC. So I think that goes back to what you were asking about, Kathleen, where it's like it needs to be there. It's just more of an awareness of being able to actually manually do this. The ADS AGC flag, it's a courtesy feature for the AGC notification, but the resource must have the capability to have the manual control to be able to place on AGC. So you need to be able to follow every 4 seconds the set points accurately, show that the regulation range reflects the accurate capability So again, a lot of that information that is in the master file is going to talk about the capabilities of your resource. So, you know, if you're going to be awarded that, you know, you're bidding for the AS, you're awarded the AS, your resource actually needs to be able to achieve according to the data that is in the master file. If there's any kind of changes to that your resource is no longer able to do that, from a long-term standpoint, you're going to want to make sure that you update the master file. Show that the regulation range reflects accurate capability, and ensure that the OMS reflects true capability and availability of the resource. Resources cannot be an AGC providing regulation with failed telemetry. So again, it's important to have the telemetry settings correct, and that if there is problems with the telemetry, that needs to, the OMS metering telemetry card is required with AS fields set to 0 availability. So again, it's really thinking about informing the market on what your resource is doing. Justin asked the question, and Brian, I'm going to hand this one off to you. Are there particular times when you're allowed to be off AGC with regulations scheduled?
No. Anytime you have a regulation award, you should be on control. If you have any kind of issues with your control system, you should have an outage in place, and you should be notifying the gen dispatcher that you are off control.
Great, thank you. Great question, Justin, and thanks, Brian. So again, if your resource is qualified, getting awards for AS, but it's not performing like it's supposed to, there are some steps that the ISO can take if you're not following those and you haven't communicated that you're not able to follow that. So, you know, there's always the possibility of physical limitations that would keep you from it. That's why informing the market, informing the ISO, you know, of any kind of limitations is going to be critical so that the market makes the best optimization and it doesn't come across, you know, here with the information where you're not able to perform and there's just no information. Because if that's happening, the California ISO Gen Dispatcher can create internal tickets. They can flag those resources that are showing that they're unable to perform. An official letter stating the importance of reliability, adhering to regulatory standards. It could request completion of training. Again, this is, and I think it's important to kind of look at training as this is a good opportunity, you know, instead of it being a punishment. It's like, hey, if training is the piece that's missing, that's an easy fix. Let's train people. Let's figure out what those steps are, so we can avoid this, because that's what we want to do. We're all in this together. We want it to work. So so training may be part of the solution to make sure that you know, everybody's on the same page, knowing how to operate their resource according to the awards. A detailed root cause analysis of why the resource isn't able to perform. Is it a telemetry issue that just hasn't been fixed? You know, is it something that, you know, that is like, you know, we'll fix it with the next go around. Next time we have an outage, we're going to fix this. That's not good. You want to be able to fix those issues, you know, identify them and resolve those, because there could be potential AS blocks preventing you to even get those AS rewards for your resource. Potential removal from the market and referral to the DMM for repeat offenders. This could take you out of the market for being able to provide ancillary services for up to 30 days or beyond. You know, so if it's not resolved within that 30 days, it you know, could go on until we find that resolution. The resolution needs to be submitted, the proof of the resolution through city. And then it gets looked at by our ISO operations management to determine if the solution is sufficient to be able to provide the AS again. I see the question in here. Let me see if I can get back to the previous slide. I think this, oops, right here. The do not perform your controllers to rely on ADS AGC feature alone. Brian, would you mind clarifying a little more specific on what that means?
Yeah, the AGC yes no flag we found in our resource performance outreach. We found that some participants rely on that yes no flag for their resources to go on control. We're asking that you don't rely on that flag, that you utilize you know, some sort of other methodology, or just don't rely on that flag solely to have your resources go on control. You know, have other methodologies or other means to place your resources on control for either outages or you know, other just have other means of control to place your resources on agency control beyond just that flag. That's what we're referring to.
Perfect. Thank you very much. A follow-up question: what is the intent of the flag if we are not to use it as an AGC indicator?
It's not. The intent is just don't just use just that. Have other means. Rely on your day-ahead awards. Have OASIS. Just have other means besides just that flag. Just for the intent of just say, you know, an ADS outage. That's just a simple example.
Perfect. Thanks. I think what Brian's talking about is, you know, not just you don't want to rely on just that one piece because, you know, there have been so many instances throughout, you know, the history of the grid where, you know, somebody will say, hey, my screen looks great, or this little piece of information is great, I don't have a problem. And, you know, it could be a frozen screen. It could be, you know, maybe a disconnect between, you know, a lot of people use different resources, you know, like user interfaces. And, you know, could there be information that did not get transferred accurately? You know, so having more ability for, you know, for being able to troubleshoot, for being able to kind of look for patterns, that's going to be able to give you better situational awareness, again, for those better decision making. If we use multiple indicators and then the indicators disagree, what should we do?
Then you could possibly rely on the ability to possibly place the resource on control manually. That's the final you know, last step there as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Great question. And then Kathleen, I see your hand is up.
Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Super. I'm going to put this in the chat too. It's just I so appreciate this training and this conversation. This is really on the performance assessment slide, though, you moved off of. Yes. So, you know, we've been fighting this uphill battle, trying really hard to get CAISO policy team to prioritize adding these rules so there's consistent and clear reporting obligations. One of the reasons it's so important, and you guys know this, and that's why you're training on it, so important for consistent outage practices. You don't have consistent outage practices on all elements. That includes availability, not just availability, which is the only thing in the tariff right now is availability impacts for generating units, system, resource-specific system resources, and eligible intermittent resources. These types of resources that you're training today don't have them. They don't, and in addition, they don't have them for load max, which is on the charging side. That doesn't exist in the tariff, neither does the maximum energy. This is such a huge gap, right? And I appreciate you training on it. I just want to make an appeal. If CAISO operations staff would you help us communicate how important, because we've been asking for years, help us communicate how important this is to your decision makers internally. They have not prioritized it, even though it's come on their desk repeatedly over and over again. It's been escalated to leadership levels. It's still not being prioritized. If you would help us communicate to them that they should start taking this seriously, not just because it's making it more challenging for scheduling coordinators, but because it makes your life harder. And like, we've even said that to them in informal meetings. Like, we don't think it's just on our plant operators struggling. We think the CAISO grid operators need help, and they need to have these rules shored up. And sometimes I feel like we're being heard, but then I don't see it. I don't see a stakeholder effort being scheduled. And I don't see the operational improvements to OMS we've asked for a year ago. That hasn't been prioritized outside of the stakeholder process. And so, I hope, Brian, I just really, if you could help us by communicating internally how much we need this, maybe your voice will be more powerful and they will prioritize it. And Heidi, thank you for letting me do this. It's been years and I'm struggling to get this traction. And so I appreciate you giving me the chance to just ask for help.
Sure, and I just wanted to respond to that. That's one of the reasons that, it's really been identified, especially, since we're talking about batteries, it's a whole new dynamic, so it's adding another level of complexity, making us all have to work together even better. And one of the things that our group is done, because we traditionally were like, markets, we're over here, but there's no longer a separation between markets and reliability. It really is so tightly together, and outages impact reliability, but they impact the market, so we're seeing how it's all tied together. And that's why one of the big efforts that our group is making is this plant resource operator training track. And so as we go through, this is going to give us an opportunity. We're going to be reaching out to do more analysis to figure out what are the issues. And we can continue to work, because a little bit later in this, I've got a slide about our division that we're really starting to work more on, really being more effective with customer outreach. And training is a big part of that. And so a lot of what we're going to be doing with training is looking at what are the actual tasks. And sometimes that will help, to put people on the same page, because it gives that opportunity for best practices. So we're looking at how to reach out with the different customers more so. We're working with Brian, his team. They've been, providing a lot of great information, because they want it to be better too. They want it to be easier, on our gen dispatchers, so they can focus on making sure that the grid is reliable and not so much on, on these other things, making sure that we have a common ground to train people on. And so that's obviously, just in this little bit of this session, it's like, that already has escalated to the top, where it's like, we need clarity around that. So we'll probably be reaching out to you, others, other customers, to find out, what are those common, and we can continue to work with Brian, his team, the upper management, because do want to have a solution. And sometimes it's just hard with the number of things we're trying to do all at the same time. And this is going to be, a slow process. It's not going to be an overnight fix, but we are committed to moving that ball forward and working, especially with the operations team and the customers to make those changes, because it helps us all, because we're all in it together. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Appreciate it. Yeah, because even like with this, the goal is not to try and lock anybody out of the market. It's like, we want those resources. We need those resources. So the better that we can know how to operate your system. And again, if you're a resource operator owner, remembering how you touch the entire grid is really going to be critical. Let's see, I'm kind of looking at our time. So, how could grid reliability be at risk by not following dispatch and operating instruction? If you wanted to write that in the chat, like, what are some of your expectations if you're not following those dispatch operating procedures? how could you affect the grid at large? So really kind of be thinking about, putting on your thinking cap. It's like, if I'm not following these, what is my impact to the grid? So you can go ahead and throw that in there. Causing blackouts due to imbalance between gen and load. Yep, absolutely. I want to say that's a good one. It's a good answer. Because it's what we don't want to have happen. And there can be effects to everybody else. Exactly. So. All right, so we've talked about outages, and based on, I'm just going to go over it kind of quickly because I definitely, heard you, and this is something that again, and Mark Richardson, thank you for putting that in there. Like you said, you've heard previously, and through the storage, through various, and working on internally on a best path forward. So, we'll go through the outages. Again, this is a high level. There are always specifics based on different resources. So there might be some nuances. This is just kind of at a higher level setting. We will be building the outage portion of the training out further, especially as, like Mark said, we look for a path forward. And we will continue to clean up the outage training. But the outage management system, that's our primary method of communicating outages. It's used to reflect physical limits of the resources. And it should be used for the physical limitations of the plant. Early submission is highly encouraged because that gives the market time to make the best optimization. It helps the generation dispatchers make the best decisions, because the more informed they are, the better that they have a picture of the availability of resources, so that they can make the best decisions. Non-urgent outages should be scheduled based on practices established in the outage management BPM in section 8.2. And so Rada just put a link in the chat to the OMS business practice manual. So that's a resource that you can go look at. So you've seen this. This is just a reminder, to be as detailed as possible about the reason for your outage. Excuse me. Excuse me. So if there is a problem, with your charging, if there's just your discharge capability, if that's limited, you'd want to put in the availability, your PMAX. What is that limitation? If there's reg up, regulation down, spin, non-spin, can your resources provide their awards? If not, put in a 0. So we mentioned that earlier. If you know that your resource cannot achieve those what has been awarded for providing AS, don't just let it ride. You want to put in a 0 and inform the market of that, so that you don't get to that point where it's showing that you're just not following those awards. For max energy, if you have a limitation to your maximum state of charge, that megawatt hour, you'd want to enter that in there. For minimum energy, SOC, also, if either of those have a physical limitation, you'd want to change those, or your load max, your PMIN, the charging capability. So again, if there are any limitations to your charging abilities or discharging abilities, your minimum or maximum state of charge, or your regulation up or down, you're going to want to make sure you go in there and put in the correct values, and again, be as detailed as possible, because that, again, aids in the decision making, especially when the operators need to look at resources and taking, mentioned before, they're responsible, our generation dispatchers are responsible for, balancing our area, balancing the grid, and also mitigating any kind of issues and communicating with different folks in order to be able to mitigate those issues. So the more information that they have, the better decisions, better operating instructions that they're going to be able to give. So you want to be as clear as possible for, again, the nature of work. You have to have a nature of work associated. There is a category that you can look at in Operating Procedure 3220, Section 3.3.1, Nature of Work. There are several categories that are there. The nature of work categories, they streamline outage submission and processing time. So that is one of the big pluses for making sure that you have that in there. It captures the relevant data for outage coordination and increases the consistency in the level of information reported. That's going to provide information to downstream systems with the structured data necessary to ensure appropriate outage processing. And that's going to facilitate increased automation of outage requests. So that's why nature of work is an important piece, because that is helping to, evolve the process more so. So use of certain nature of work categories, that's going to determine whether an outage derate for, let's say, an RA resource is going to be subject to rain. So that could have an impact as well. And that's in section 40.9 of the tariff has some information about that. So it is important to be thinking about that, because it's going to move that process faster along, help us collect more data, work on those downstream processes so that we can make the outage process more streamlined. So ramping is another important thing to be considered when you're following operating instructions. For any kind of instructions that are received, the set point is going to increment linearly from the starting point to target at an agreed upon rate. This could be during testing, but it's also when your resource is getting an award. That your set points are going to increment every 4 seconds from start to finish, and a resource is expected to respond linearly as instructions are received. So resource response, you're not supposed to step above what the expected ramp rate is during the testing or normal operations. Again, those ramp rates are listed in your, according to your master file, what capabilities are. And one of the big reasons that this is very important is that batteries are a different animal. They can be up and running instantaneously, and that can lead to a lot of additional challenges. You think, oh, this is very cool, but on May 1st, there was an NRI stakeholder meeting, which is actually online. It's recorded. We'll provide a link in a little bit. But one of the, actually, Rada just put it in there. Drew Thompson, one of our lead gen dispatchers, he explained a story about a battery resource and how, it could turn on immediately and ramp up to incredible levels. And the system's not ready for it because it's all connected. It's all looking at timing and how all the resources are being optimized together. And so, an example of a resource that, went up 250 megawatts instantaneously. But if you look at San Francisco, their average load can be between 300 and 600 megawatts. So that's like, that change can be quite significant. You multiply that towards, times the whole system, it can have those impacts, and then the system has to rebalance itself out. So not stepping above, making sure that you have that linear ramp is going to help the system to balance and not have to either, drop or pick up more megawatts to compensate. A default ramp rate should be a controlled value. So in the Market Operations Business Practice Manual 7.2.3.6 trajectory data. That's where you can find more information that's specific about the ramping. From a battery standpoint, if we're looking at, at testing, or when you're looking at the ramp rates, when your resource is available, that you've got the testing, but then when it's actually available, it needs to be able to be dispatched again at that 5-minute DOT. And if providing the regulation, it's going to need to be able to follow a set point, that every 4 seconds. So ensuring that the ramping capabilities of the resource during testing is key to communicating those test plans to the ISO gen dispatcher. But then once it goes live, it needs to be able to follow that as well. So batteries are kind of unique. They can produce, again, like we just said, full capacity megawatts, and it's like flipping on a light switch. And again, while that's impressive because of the way the grid is interconnected and balanced, those linear ramps are required to maintain that 60 hertz, that frequency of 60 hertz, to make sure that we're keeping all of the connected resources in the grid safe. Before I go to frequency changes, I don't know if any of my subject matter experts, Brian, if you had anything about linear ramping or outages that that you wanted to share before we moved on, or?
No, I think we're good there. I think, the link to the stakeholder meeting recording there, I think Drew had a good example there from, how one battery can ramp from the bottom to the top and, cover all of San Francisco's load was a good example there. So just be mindful of how you're ramping your resource from the top to the bottom and, make sure you're linearly ramping correctly, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Brad, before we go on, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I do. So one, I was going to see is there any specificity when we say what we want for ramp rates? We say make it linear, which agreed, but do we want to say 100 megawatts a minute, 1,000 megawatts a minute? Is there any guidance or any limitations that would be hard and fast numbers? Because the systems can do on the order of thousands of megawatts a minute if we went to instantaneous setting.
There are no current limitations on how fast or how there are no limitations currently, no.
Okay, and then it may just be, I'll call it a general recommendation. I think it would probably, from a system standpoint, be good to come up with some standards for that, so operators know where they need to be, because what Vistra sets at their ramp rates may be different than other participants. So having a disparity between all the different participants could have caused other problems.
Understood, and we'll take that back, and we'll see if we can come up with something.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so responding to frequency changes, this I'm just going to cover at a very high level, kind of quickly. Ali Maramati, he covered this in the May 1st meeting that Rada put a link in earlier. You can probably still see it there. And so this is actually recorded, and he gave more depth, more detail. But I just wanted to kind of bring it up to kind of bridge that gap between the NRI process and hear about frequency response and how that should be something that is a consideration for your generators, especially when we're thinking about batteries. So I recommend going and listening to this section where he's explaining it. And then if you have any questions, putting in a city ticket where they can respond if it goes any deeper. But I'll just kind of cover this pretty quickly. but this will be something that we continue to evolve into a deeper training as well. But for a couple of things to think about with frequency, there's the primary frequency response. First stage of frequency control is the response of the generator governors and loads to arrest locally detected changes in frequency. So, so it's really looking at what, and then Drew, these are just the definitions, and dead bands. So kind of an overview of the primary frequency response. It is, again, the first order of response, and it's making sure that we're maintaining that 60 hertz, that we're not risking that reliability. So that's one of the first things that you're thinking about. We talked a lot about AGC operators and markets, and so it kind of want to be thinking in terms of that first, because that affects the whole system. So it's critical that units are obligated to provide, and they're actually doing so, that they're providing at that frequency level. Megawatt response of a resource, part of it has to do with droop, and that's basically how fast your unit can provide the megawatts and how many it can provide. And then there's the availability of the stored megawatt SAC during a specific range of SOC when you can't provide that frequency response. There's information about that in your generator agreement. So there's more information there. Oops, sorry. But what he wanted to really make the point on is that for frequency, you want to make sure that you're on a primary control mode. And he went through this example here where most battery storage facilities, they have AGC as a primary control mode. And if that's the case, then that must be on the primary control mode and be additive to other control modes. So let's say that there's, here's an example. The one on the left is the good example. The one on the right is not. The left provided frequency response. They made sure that they had their primary control mode, and they were able to respond more quickly. The one on the right was not set on that. They had their PFR on secondary AGC control mode, and were not able to respond the way that they should have. When we talk about it being additive, if an operating instruction is received for 20 megawatts, and that's what the frequency is obligated them to go 1 more megawatt higher, to 1 megawatt, it would be additive to the 20 megawatt dispatch operating target and then the extra one. This is, like I said, I'm kind of butchering this part, but I would recommend going back and watching his video in that link, because he explains this, and it is becoming a critical piece, and we will build this out further in the training. But because of the batteries providing the energy and having that effect on frequency control, then this is very critical. So I encourage you to go look at this and watch that again. If you have any questions on that, you can either submit them to us and we'll get them to Ollie and his team, or else we will, we'll respond, or you can put it into a city ticket. So communication, we kind of talked about this before, but it's really critical that communication is clear, and that there's not a lot of confusion. So it's just like some of the suggestions that have been made here about moving forward. Communication is key through master file data, bids and schedules, outage information, telemetry and metering, and then following the operating instructions. Again, these paths are critical. to knowing who you need to talk to within your own organization. If you're a resource owner, who's your SC and who's the one that's responding to the ISO? What is your path of communication? Scheduling coordinators, who are you talking to at your resources to make sure that they're available and able to operate quickly? We mentioned this last time, if a verbal operating instruction comes out, does require 3-part communication. So again, as an example, if our operator, Gen Dispatcher said, I need for you to take unit ABC 123 offline within the next 10 minutes, as a resource operator, you are then, would need to say, you know, this is ISO resource operator, that shouldn't be ISO. I understand you're instructing me to take unit ABC 123 offline within the next 10 minutes. Yes, that's correct. So 3-part communication is important to avoid mistakes, because you don't want to be thinking you're following the operating instruction correctly, but have misheard something and cause bigger issues, especially for an operating instruction, because that's usually, if that's happening, there's some kind of a system issue. Again, maintaining situational awareness of how your resource impacts the system is very, very important. Because as we talked about the example that Drew shared, there was an example of a resource that was just going very uncontrollably, cycling very quickly down in Southern California. They felt it all the way up in Alberta. So, and we're having to make operational adjustments. So again, just remembering that when you're running your resource, you're connected to everybody else and every other thing. So making sure that you are paying attention to, what you're doing. If it's a software update, is that going to impact others? If you're not following your ramp correctly, if you're not following your dispatch operating instructions, how is that impacting everyone else? I'm sorry, I know we're running very short on time. Compliance, we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into it, but you want to make sure that you are following your instructions, because there are, steps that would need to be taken if we can't get there. So where can you learn more? This is going to be posted, but there are a lot of different resources that are available. Operating instruction guides, job aids, tariffs, the business practice manuals, federal and regulatory standards, those are all online. We're all following those, so you can find those on our website. Again, the new resource owner operator guide that we just created has a lot of these resources that we encourage you to be paying attention to. And let's see, hold on. And the NRI page has a lot of great information as well. Our next class is tomorrow, Managing Intertie Transactions. Our summer assessment has just come out. We highly encourage you to check that out, because that does have a lot of good information getting us ready for summer. So that was just published, and there's a lot of good information in there. And then stay informed through policy initiatives like we just talked about earlier, Day's Outlook, which provides a lot of great information, and subscriptions and notifications. Our team, Stakeholder Engagement and Customer Experience, is here to be listening, to continue these trainings, and also to share more information. So we'll continue to work with the customers, et cetera, so that we can we continue to evolve and make sure that we're maintaining the safety of the grid. To recap, takes us all to maintain that reliability, know the intricacies of your battery resource impact on the bulk electric system, communicate, communicate, communicate. I think that's very important. Be aware of what your system is, making sure that you have control over that 24/7, because you never know when the, when you're going to need to operate. Who's there, making sure that you have processes for somebody to go be able to check if, or take action if necessary, and actively monitoring your resources and responding to operating instructions within the required time parameters consistent with the tariff requirements. And we do ask that you share this with your colleagues. So it's great that you're here in training, but share this with others that are not there, not here, because, you know, it just takes one person not having that awareness that could lead to potential issues. I'm sorry, no, I wrapped it up very quickly here at the end. I do see a couple of questions. We could stick around for a few minutes. Thanks, Donald. We'll keep moving. I wish it could have been available too. We'll keep going with these kind of trainings. There are some good links in there. We will be posting this presentation and the recording within 3 business days on our Learning Center. We do ask that you fill out the surveys, because that's going to help us know where we need to go with the training. So please let us know. It's like, hey, you didn't answer this, or here's what I would like in next training. Help us develop this training program that we're going to be working on. So with that, I'll say goodbye for anybody who needs to drop off now, but I will also open it up if anybody has any final questions. All right, thank you. Yes, and Rada put in a note, a follow-up email is going to come out, and it's going to have all the links, because there's so many directions we could go with the training, and we will get there. But you know, one of the things that we're trying to work on is at least getting you in touch with the information, so that you can kind of go, okay, here's this, and now what's my question, to be able to follow up. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, at the customerreadiness@caiso.com. I want to thank very much to Rada for being a great producer. And Brian, thank you very much for your input. Michael, thank you for your input. And for all of you that participated, thank you very much. And good luck to the policy folks in your meeting today. You know, just working together, sharing information, and really bringing in the end users, I think, is going to be real key to making sure that we make substantive changes. So we look forward to having you in training tomorrow or in future trainings. But other than that, have a great rest of your day, and we will talk again later. Bye-bye.